Hello, beautiful souls. My name is Jessie, and welcome to my Tiny Talks podcast, the show where we'll dive into self-love, inner child healing, and discovering your soul's purpose. I look forward to chatting with you every single Sunday and helping you grow exponentially in all areas of your life. Without further ado, here's today's Tiny Talk. Hello, you guys, and welcome back to my Tiny Talks podcast. I'm your host, Jessie Brown, and I am so excited to be here with you all. I am pumped to dive into week 41 of Tiny Talks with you guys, where we are going to be diving into 10 different signs that you've grown and 10 different signs that you're evolving and becoming the next best version of yourself. Or maybe you've just grown in areas that maybe you haven't given yourself credit for or that you haven't reflected on. And so these are 10 areas that I sat with when I was brainstorming for this podcast episode. And these were just the top 10 things that came up for me that I've noticed about myself, but maybe things that I didn't notice right away and took a little bit of time and effort to think of. And so my goal is that some of these might resonate with you, where you can just give yourself that pat on the back of how much you've grown to continue on the direction in which you are going. Because if you are like me and you are just growth oriented and want to become the best next version of yourself and the highest version of yourself, and you are just craving that sense of finding your purpose and elevating, it's really good to have those pinpointed spots of seeing where you've come from so that you can reflect of how much you've grown on where it is that you're wanting to go next. And so if you didn't check out last week's episode, episode 40 was all about why having a routine is so crucial. I definitely encourage you to check out that episode. It was one of my favorite ones to record thus far, but nonetheless, I am so excited to dive into week 41 with you all, where we are going to be diving into 10 signs that you have grown. So without further ado, here we go. So the idea for this podcast really came to me because I recently joined a group coaching program again. This is my second time going through this program, and it's with Kevin and Alan from Next Level University. And as I was preparing to go through this group coaching, I was just reflecting on how much I've changed since the last time that I went through this program, and how that was only a year ago, and how we often think of growth as this long periods of time, when in reality, we are actually growing every single day. And whether that's intentional growth, meaning we have a way that we're tracking our habits and we're going after a particular goal, or if we're just naturally becoming older and growing as we get older. But the reason that this surfaced is because I realized that we often go through our lives without realizing the growth that we've had until other people point it out. Because you'll hear other people say, you've changed, you've grown, something's different about you, whatever it is. But when we can have those thoughts for ourselves and think for ourselves, it really is a cool experience, especially if we've grown in a positive way. Because we're able to see the work that we've put in that is beginning to pay off. And I know that in a year from now, I'm going to be thinking an even heightened version of myself, because now my expectations for myself are even higher than they were for this last year. And so that momentum is going to keep going. And so my first point that I want to dive into of signs that you've grown is one that's really been sticking out for me recently. And that's that old things that kind of used to bother you or would get to you just don't anymore, or don't hurt as deeply. And so the reason that this point surfaced for me was because the other day I had posted something on social media. It was a picture of me golfing, but the point of the picture wasn't that I was golfing. The point of the picture was that I had got out of my comfort zone and I was trying something new, and I discovered a new sport and I loved it, and I had a lot of fun and just talking about our comfort zones. And someone had commented something on it that really had nothing to do with the picture, nor to do with what the message was that I was trying to portray. And this was coming from somebody that used to be a friend of mine in the past, and I just felt for a quick second very belittled, and kind of switched back to how Jessie used to think a year ago, where I would want to be really upset about that and maybe say something back, or maybe just let that get me down for a long period of time. And I acknowledge that, yeah, it hurt, but I wasn't let it sitting with me for as long as I would have. And so that was a big sign for me, is that when you begin to notice things that would have been triggering for you or would have just been stuck with you or whatever it is, and you just learn to brush it off. And I think that you learn to brush it off when you've grown, because you're able to just realize where you're investing your energy and asking yourself, is this worth it? Does this person's opinion of me really matter in the grand scheme of things? And this episode is going to be hardcore in that I'm truth dialing 10 and I'm speaking my truth and I'm going all in, because that's another thing, is that we often just cover up things and try to keep them simple and keep them small to keep the peace, but we're not speaking our truth and growing when we do that. And so my first sign that you've grown is that old things that would have upset you still might upset you, because we're still human and we have emotions, but you're able to get over it faster, or you're able to brush it aside faster, or you're able to see your growth in those moments of, wow, that really didn't hurt as much as that would have hurt me X amount of time ago. And so that was a huge one for me. And that's not in just this situation, that's across the board. That's if someone says something to me about my podcast that's negative, or says something about me, about my boutique that is negative. I just know that what I believe in is what I believe in, and it makes me happy and it gives me fulfillment. So why would I value the opinions of other people who aren't in the same arena? And I think that we all do that, and that's what keeps us stuck in our comfort zone and stuck keeping us small, is because we value the opinions of others so much more than our own self-love and self-respect of knowing how things make us feel in our core. And so everything that I just said kind of brings me into my second sign that you've grown. And that's that you're able to use your voice and speak your truth. And I think that we're all a little bit different in this one, because some of us are maybe stronger in using our voices, but maybe it's coming from more of an ego place or a hurt place. But when we're able to use our voice with a sense of purpose, of speaking our truth, not with the aim of hurting anybody or making anybody feel less than or wrong, but just that we're able to speak from our heart of what we feel. Because I'm learning slowly over time, because I used to be that person that would never say anything. I would get walked all over, cheated on, lied to, whatever it was, had no boundaries, no self-love, no self-respect, and I didn't use my voice. And I think that a lot of that was taught to me through witnessing how my mom would deal with conflict, how my grandmother would deal with conflict, and their response was to remain quiet and remain in their shell. And so that was taught to me from such a young age that that is just how it's supposed to be. You are just supposed to be quiet and go with it. But I'm learning the more that I heal and the more that I grow is that that's actually only doing a disservice to yourself. And yes, 100%, there is a difference between drama and causing conflict and using your words to hurt people and using your words to stand up for yourself in times that it would be a disservice to you. And so the important thing here is, again, signs that you've grown is that you're noticing that in times when you feel that your boundaries are being crossed or that your truth is not being heard, your side is not being heard, you're able to state that and just stand up for yourself. Because again, for a lot of my life, I didn't have that. And that really just began to trickle into a lot of areas of my life where I was holding myself back. And so even check in with where you are with that. How are you with using your voice? How are you with standing up for yourself, especially for things that you believe in? When we're able to speak our truth, and that's also through my podcast, speaking my truth of how I feel and just my learnings and wanting to share that. And so a sign that you've grown is that you recognize that your voice and your opinions are valid and that you want to share that with the world, which is such a beautiful, beautiful thing. So if that is you, just know that that is huge and that is hard, especially depending where you came from. If that wasn't normal or taught to you or it's foreign to you to use your voice, just know that if you found that, to hold on to that, because we're all allowed to have a voice. We're all allowed to have a say. And when we don't have that, it's almost like there's a restraint. There's something keeping us back. And so being able to use your voice and speak your truth is such a sign of growth, because it shows self-love and self-confidence and self-respect of honoring how you are feeling. My third point of signs that you've grown is that you're able to catch yourself before and or during a spiral. And so what I mean by this is we often can spiral in different areas of our life, meaning something triggers us and we instantly go into a fight, flight, freeze, or something upsets us and we instantly get angry, or someone does something and we instantly go back to how we would have responded as a child or as an adolescent. So signs that you've grown is that you're able to either notice that you did spiral, so the aftermath of noticing that you did it, which is a great place to start, and catching that. But if you're able to catch yourself before and during, those are huge signs of growth. Because if you're able to catch yourself during something, that means that there's a part of your brain saying, hey, this isn't really working for us anymore. Remember when we said we weren't going to do that anymore? Let's try to change that. Right? And it allows you to change the narrative right then and there. And so for me, a huge one for this is if somebody is talking at me or yelling at me, my initial instinct would be to just shut down and be quiet and to just let that happen. So I had just talked about using my voice, but for this one particularly, I begin to catch that. If something like that happens, I'm able to say, I'm really not appreciating how I'm being spoken to right now. Whenever this happens, it causes me to shut down. So if I shut down, this is why. So being able to voice that and just notice how your body responds to things. Because if you know me, you know how passionate I am about mental health and about healing and trauma and rewiring the brain, and that we all have the capacity to do so. But I also know that it's a very hard and challenging thing to do. Especially if we've been stuck in our ways and in our routines and in our instincts for a very long time. And so if you're able to catch yourself before or during a spiral, that is a huge sign of growth. And a spiral could also mean if you're someone who deals with anxiety. I'm someone who deals with anxiety severely. It's definitely substantially decreased, but it'll still be there always. But it's catching myself before that spiral happens of, have I drank anything? Do I need anything right now? Have I eaten anything? Have I been outside? Have I poured into myself today? Right? So catching yourself before you're doing those things, because the more that you are able to catch yourself before or during, you're able to see patterns of when those things happen. You're able to begin to identify what your triggers are. Right? You're able to tune into yourself of, oh, I've been doing that for a really long time, haven't I? Because often when we do those spirals or we do those things, we do it subconsciously. We don't realize that we're doing it when we do it, because if we did, it likely wouldn't affect us negatively and we wouldn't have to want to fix it in the first place. And so that is a huge sign of growth that I definitely don't want anyone to undermine if this is you. If you are able to begin to catch yourself before you spiral or during or even after, and just giving yourself that awareness, just know that that is not an easy thing to practice and do. And so just be proud of yourself for a moment. And if me going through that point made you realize that, maybe I do have areas of my life that I have an instinctual reaction, or maybe I do spiral a lot when this happens or that happens. And so how can you begin to catch yourself? I always say that phrase, catch it, change it, release it. Catch what you're doing that you want to change. Try to cognitively change it in that moment and then release it. Let it go. It's already happened. It doesn't serve you. How can we move forward from here? My fourth point, and I did a podcast episode on this a couple weeks ago about being alone versus being unfulfilled. And this is like one of the biggest signs of growth, in my honest opinion, because I am someone who has always kind of struggled to be by myself. And so I would bring people into my life and attract the same types of people, even though they were serving me in no way in my present time. At one point in time, yes. But even currently right now in my life, my circle of people is very small. Very, very, very small. Under 5 people, I would say, besides family. And the reason for that is because I'm very selective on the people that I allow in my circle now, because I've set my boundaries. I know my truth. I know my worth. I know what I'm going for. I know what I'm striving for. I know the path that I need to be on and the things that veer me off of that. And so I have to have self-discipline. I want to attract those right people. And so a sign of growth is that you're okay not having 50 friends and sitting with that. It's okay to not have plans or to do all these things to fit in if it's not serving you. And so if you would rather be alone than be unfulfilled and around people that make you feel icky, less than, worthless, whatever, that is a huge sign of growth, because in society's eyes, it's not really cool to not have a bunch of friends in a big friend circle, right? And it's not an easy thing to do. It's lonely. It's really lonely sometimes, but I also recognize that I feel the same sometimes when I'm by myself of loneliness as I did when I was around those people. And that's like a huge red flag. If you're noticing the people that are in your circle and you're surrounding yourself with aren't lifting you up, and they aren't encouraging, and they aren't respectful of your boundaries, and they don't want to see the best for you, and they don't want to push you to be your best, and vice versa, that goes both ways. They're not your people. Because your people, you should feel it in your heart like, oh, I just love being around them. I feel comfortable with them. I feel safe. They push me to be my best. Because if a friendship is just to go out drinking on the weekends and to party with, maybe that's your jam and that's your thing, and that's cool. But for me, a huge sign of growth is just that if you're okay with being uncomfortable, being alone, and you're willing to wait for those right people, because it doesn't mean you're going to be alone forever. It means that you're waiting until those right people come along. You're putting out into the universe, and whatever it is that resonates with you, your non-negotiables, not putting up with those things. And so that is a huge sign of growth, is being okay, being uncomfortable, being alone, rather than being around people that make you feel icky and unfulfilled. My next point, and I really hope that I can make this one land, because again, in the beginning when I said this is a full truth dial 10, I am going in on this episode, because I think that being vulnerable with you guys is the only way to help grow. Because if I can't be vulnerable and speak my truth from a raw place, how can I expect my listeners and you guys and people around me to want to be that version of themselves? And so this next one is that you kind of begin to not care what those, and when I wrote it down, I had put behind you say, but what I really mean is you begin to care less on a scale what people think that aren't in the same arena as you. And so for me right now, that is podcasting. And so when someone tries to have an opinion, a negative opinion towards me in podcasting, I first have to ask myself, are they a podcaster? Are they operating in the same field as me? Are they striving for the same goals as me? Are they ahead of me in where I want to go? And if the answer is no, I want you to ask yourself how valuable their opinion is. And this was one that really shook me up when I first heard it on a podcast, because I was just like, oh my gosh, can you imagine telling someone their opinion isn't valuable? And I don't mean it in that way. But I mean noticing if someone tells you feedback, but it's not feedback that you would necessarily take for yourself or want to take from that person, asking how that's affecting you. Because if your thing is something that you know and you believe in, then you need to look up to other people in that area and similar areas that get that. Because there's a lot of areas in my life that I would never give other people my opinion in, because it's just not my realm of expertise. So who am I to say something? And I think that we all do that, and we ask our friends hey, you think I should start this business? And hey, what do you think of this? And hey, what do you think of that? And more often times than not, we end up getting disappointed. And so a huge sign of growth is that you kind of just stop caring as much what people say that aren't in the same area. And yes, it's okay to be a human being and hear what people have to say, but it's how much you allow that to sit with you is the point that I'm trying to make. Because your loved ones and your family and whatever it is, they're always going to have an opinion. They're always going to want to tell you something. And that's okay. But it's how we choose to take what they say. Do we allow that to veer us off of what we're doing? If someone told me my podcast is terrible and da-da-da, first of all, that's one person. And that's the other thing, is if it's only one person in the grand scheme of things, how much does it really matter if it makes you happy, brings you joy, brings you fulfillment? But I think that we do that a lot, right? We don't wear certain things because we don't think society will allow it to fit in. We don't strive from outside the beaten path because we're scared of what people will say. But who is it to really say what is right and what is wrong, especially what is right and what is wrong for you? Because only you know that, and only you can ask yourself those questions. So for this one, I encourage you to find people ahead of you. Find people you look up to. That's why role models are great. I did an episode on role models as well not too long ago. Having those people that you look up to, those people that you genuinely aspire to be like. So focusing on that. So that is that point, which is that you just begin to care a little bit less about what people say that isn't serving you. And I will just say that that is one of the hardest ones, but one of the biggest signs of growth. My next point, and one that I think kind of stems from all the other ones in a way of our capacity, and that's that you're kinder to others. And I wrote that one down because I just remember when I finally felt like I stepped into my purpose and my power and who I am, I felt like, and I got rid of all those people that weren't serving me and whatever it was, I just felt like I had so much more capacity to just see the beauty in the world and just hone into that. But for so long, I just didn't have the physical or mental capacity to take on anything else. And so I felt like my connections with people, specifically strangers, was just very surface level because I just didn't have it in me to get to that deeper root and deeper conversation. And I just didn't have the capacity when I was out and about at the stores to smile and say hi to people and out for a walk, and I'd put my phone down or my head down and go on my phone. And because I just had no sense of self-love and self-confidence and ability within me to pour that extra energy. And so a huge sign that you've grown is that you're kinder to others. Because if you're growing and you're aspiring and you're proud and happy and claiming that and you're in that, your frequency is just higher. Your vibration is just higher. And again, that was one of my first episodes, which was all about frequency and your level of which you had the capacity to do things. Because when you're operating out of a frequency of joy and happiness and fulfillment and alive and just aspiring, you're vibrating higher. You're able to allow that to pour into others, for them to pour into others, right? And so that was a huge sign for me of growth, is that I just noticed I had the capacity and the confidence to look up, to smile, to notice what's around me. And yes, I still have off days, and I have days where I just need to put my head down and be in my head, or bad mental health days, whatever it is, but just holistically noticing how you are as a human being around other people. How are you operating around other people? Do you feel a sense of shame when you're around other people? Do you want to shut down? Do you feel anxious? Do you feel angry? How do you feel? Because I think a lot of the times it just comes from within our own capacity to handle other things going on around us. And so that is that point, is that you're just able to be kinder and more open to others. My next point, you stick to your boundaries. A huge sign of growth. And I actually think these kind of interchange with each other, because I think that you need to have strict boundaries in order to grow, but in order to grow, you need to have strict boundaries. And they both go hand in hand. And for me, for a very long time, I struggled with boundaries because I didn't know which areas in my life I was letting myself down in the areas that I needed to have boundaries. And so it took me a while of growing and going to therapy and healing, and just in a while, I mean literally years of just sitting with that and noticing and being able to put those boundaries in place. Even just communicating of, I'm not going to be able to do the same things I was able to do a couple months ago or a year ago because I'm really focused on my goals, and so setting those boundaries. Certain people that speak to me in a certain way, having those boundaries of, hey, I'm noticing that this is a trend that's happening. This is how it makes me feel when you speak to me that way, I'm wondering if this can be the boundary that's in place, and then going from there. But I think that a huge sign of growth is that you're even able to recognize that you need to have boundaries, because we all need to have them. And I think we all think of boundaries as like this really icky, weird thing in the mental health field and whatever it is, but boundaries are basically just sticking to what you know that you need as a human being and not tolerating things that intervene with that. Because when we allow others to conflict or to break our boundaries, it really only hurts us over and over again. But first of all, if we don't even state what our boundaries are to people, they're not going to know that. And so we need to be able to voice what they are. And that can be really, really hard and really, really uncomfortable. Especially if you're like me and using your voice specifically for something you think could be a conflict aspect is hard for you, because I know that it can really, really disrupt my system. So I know what that's like, especially when it's those that you care about the most and that you love the most, because it's hard to put boundaries. But a huge sign that you've grown is that you're just able to stick to them and not lean left or right to help others feel more comfortable. Because I've done that for most of my life, and I think that all of us do that, is we sabotage our own self-peace and self-love for other people's comfort. But at some point in time, that's going to catch up, and at some point, your own peace and comfort is going to be jeopardized. And so it's about finding that happy medium of how can we just work together, and if we can't, that is a new boundary. And so that is that point, is you're able to stick to your boundaries. My next point, and this one kind of speaks for itself, but it's that you want to keep growing. You just want to keep evolving. And it's just like, it's like an addiction in a way of, once you kind of get in that mindset, it's really, really hard to dial that down, especially when you begin to put in boundaries and get around like-minded people and just find things that resonate, and you keep deepening that. It's really, really hard to turn that off or to slow that down. And it's such a beautiful process, but a huge sign of growth is just that, is that you want to keep growing. You're itching, you're just hungry to just climb and keep going. And I think that you'll know those things because you'll feel them and you'll want to do them. Like me right now recording this podcast, I feel extremely in flow, very in my body, very creative, just myself. And it just inspires me to just want to keep going and keep growing and learning more about it so that I can deliver the best content to you guys and improve my speaking and improve areas that I'm definitely not an expert in yet, but just continuing to get better. And I'm using myself as an example because of course that's all I know, but plug this into the areas of your life. Plug that into the areas that you want to keep growing. Maybe it's with school, maybe it's your business, maybe it's your job, maybe it's your relationship, maybe it's a training, your body, physically, mentally, whatever it is. A huge sign that you've grown is that you just want to keep growing, keep evolving, keep going. So check in with yourself with that, because maybe you're growing more than you've realized or that you've given yourself credit for. And so check in on yourself with that. Number 9 is that you hold yourself accountable. A huge sign of growth is that you hold yourself accountable. And holding yourself accountable across the board in your life. That doesn't just mean with your goals or your job or whatever it is. That means across the board of keeping those promises that you make to yourself. And I've talked about that multiple times on my podcast before, but keeping those promises that you make to yourself and keeping that accountability. Because a huge sign of growth is self-confidence. And a large way that we can gain self-confidence and self-love is through holding ourselves accountable. So if we say we're going to go to the gym and we don't go, we start to feel really icky, right? And we get down on ourselves. And then tomorrow comes and we do the same thing. And this all happens subconsciously. We might not think it's a big deal, but over time, as it keeps going, your level of self-confidence and self-worth begins to deplete. And so a huge sign of growth is that you're holding yourself accountable. what you're saying and doing specifically, like verbally, and what you're sharing on social media, and what basically practicing what you preach is a huge sign of growth. Because we often can flare ourselves up and pretend like we're doing all these things and say all these great things, but are you actually doing it behind the scenes? Are you actually doing the things that you say that you're doing? Because I think oftentimes we just want to look good in the face of other people, but that doesn't make us feel good long term. That might make us feel good in the moment, or when people say things, or when you can see those likes and comments on social media. But at the end of the day, A, that's not sustainable, and B, that's only going to affect you negatively. And so a huge sign of growth, again, is that you hold yourself accountable. You stick to the things that you say that you're going to do. And I always like to say, like, with this point is, if this is new to you, start with 1 to 2 things that you want to keep consistent in your life. 1 to 2 things. Start with that. Start with something achievable so you don't feel discouraged and it feels attainable. And then grow from there. Great things start small. And so finding those ways that you can have accountability is going to develop your self-confidence and your self-worth, which is going to pour into self-growth. And so that was one that I really wanted to drive home, because I think it's undermined more than we think that it is. Self-accountability is like the make or break of our confidence. Because think how much that we say we're going to do things and we don't, and how much they hurt. And I use the example all the time. Imagine if your partner or your friend or whoever kept making promises to you and kept breaking them. You would start to feel kind of icky and frustrated with that person. But think about how that's all happening in our subconscious. How we might be feeling icky and less than in our mind, which is flowing into us in our thoughts more than we think it is. Number 10. And this one kind of goes into a couple that I said before, and they really do all kind of intertwine together because they are all signs of growth. But number 10 is that you're very selective on your circle. And I did mention that you'd rather be alone than unfulfilled, but even in saying that, like you're very selective on who you allow just to be not only in your physical circle, but also the things and places and just things that consume your life. And so that can even mean the shows that you watch, the music that you listen to, the type of places that you go, the type of clothes that you wear, everything. You're very selective on those things and things that are in alignment and that resonate with you. Because oftentimes we stick to the same things because it's all that we know and all that we're comfortable with. But what if there's something else that you really, really want and you aspire and that you want to have, but you just don't, or you allow the same things to happen over again. You allow the same people in your life. You keep going to the same places and again, keep letting yourself down. And so number 10, which is you're selective on your circle of the things that you allow to be around you, right? And so I remember for me, when I started my growth journey and just beginning this journey, I just wanted to declutter a bunch of things and just get rid of things that were no longer serving me and clothes that just didn't really feel like me anymore, and basically just doing a big declutter and being selective on the things that I allowed in my life. Did they spark joy? Did they bring me fulfillment? And so being intentional with that and noticing that. And so those are my 10 points on signs that you've grown. And these were just the signs that came up for me, but I encourage you to maybe sit with yourself. What are signs that you have that you've grown? What are ways that you can reflect that you've grown in your life? Maybe you go back through these 10 points and you highlight under each of them what those areas are for you in your life. Maybe this is the kickstart to you beginning that journey, to beginning your growth journey, because we can begin that journey at any time. We can be intentional about how we show up and how we grow. And my favorite word, pivot. We can pivot at any time. Growth kind of just fell into my lap one day when I started listening to a podcast. And then I started to get around my young living community, which was very growth oriented and community oriented. And then I started to listen to Next Level University podcast, which was very growth oriented. And then I started to listen to Discover Your Dharma by Sahara Rose. And then I started listening to On Purpose by Jay Shetty. And then I started reading Atomic Habits by James Clear. And then I started reading all these other books and doing all these other things. And then slowly all of it kind of just intersected. And something just clicked in me of, oh, okay, this is giving me direction. And that's not going to look the same for everybody. And not everybody's going to resonate. But I do think that to become the best version of ourselves, we do have to be willing to grow. We do have to be willing to be uncomfortable and to suffer a little bit and to go through those phases and that ebb and flow that can be hard sometimes. Because growth is not easy. Getting outside of our comfort zone is not easy. In fact, it is very painful. It is very lonely. It is very hard. But I'm just so much more sure now in myself, in my life, in the things that surround me than I was when I just put up with mediocre things because I thought that that's all I could ever have. But I promise you that that limited thinking is just stuff that's been wired in you for your life, in your past life, and whatever it is. So it's about reminding yourself that if your heart is still beating, your mind is still thinking, and you are still here, you have endless opportunities to grow, to aspire, to chase, to become, to elevate to the person that you dream to be, to the person that you want and desire to be. But it starts and it ends with you. You've grown so much already in your life. Imagine where you could be a week from now, a month from now, a year, 6 years. Imagine that person and sit with maybe what you want them to be and what are the actions that they will have to do in order to get there. And so I know this episode was a little more intense than maybe some of them in the past, but that's because I'm just ready to dial it up, to fully speak my truth, to speak from my experiences, because that is the whole point of why I think I feel pulled to do this and share this with you all, is to use my voice to help, I always say, even one person to change your life. And so I hope that this resonated. I hope that this landed. And I just want you to know that if no one's told you, I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of you for everything that you're doing, everything that you want to do. And if you're listening to this podcast in the first place, that shows that even a part of you wants to grow. A part of you is curious about discovering your purpose, healing your inner child, becoming the best version of yourself. And so I just want you to know how proud I am of you and how much I'm rooting for you and cheering you on. I would love to connect. If you would love to follow me on Instagram, I'm at JessieBrown13. Send me a message. I would love to connect. I would love to hear about the areas in your life that you are wanting to grow in and just connect off of that. Getting around those like-minded people will transform your life more than you could ever imagine. I want to thank you guys so much from the bottom of my heart for tuning into week 41 of Tiny Talks. I look forward to chatting with you all next week for week 42. I hope you're all having a great day, and I'll chat with you soon. Bye, you guys. Thank you all so much for tuning into this week's episode of Tiny Talks. I absolutely love connecting with you all, so make sure you're following me on Instagram. I am at JessieBrown13. If you enjoyed today's episode, please feel free to leave a review or share with someone you think would enjoy. I look forward to chatting with you all next week. And remember, get out of your head and into your heart.